think it was all hard.
Yeah.
Everything was hard. It was all unfamiliar.
It was harder than I expected. I think that's, but that came not so much from a conceptual challenge, but a technical one. So the actual bits of skill needed in crafting the thing, sort of the craft work involved itself, seemed to call on a measure of expertise that I didn't possess. And so trying to become more expert and more skilled in this compressed period of time was pretty challenging.
Okay. But again, you do what you can do. And I always remember Linda Brodkey saying in the basic writer course I took from her years ago, keep remembering second language acquisition, or non-native speakers. She said, think about yourself. When you were taking the French class and you had the exam, did you write what you knew, or did you write what you could write in French? And that's what I was doing with this, you know, and I was, maybe my horizons were low, but I was saying this is what I can do in this technological medium right now.
One thing that was kind of hard was I had to relearn iMovie because I'd done work in Final Cut Pro and one of the Sony on PC, so I had to kind of go back to iMovie and try to just make things work because there's not a lot of nuance, I guess you say, in that. But, you know, I just wanted to do it in that too, and it's perfectly fine. So that was a bit, I have to actually have to put some time into this, you know, and figure out how it works. I had forgotten some steps.
So some of the challenges for me have just been learning the technology, although I've been pleased that sort of the principles I have in my head about how technology works from other you know, engagement with technology has served me well, and I can and most of it is fairly intuitive. A lesson that I have learned over time that I'm being reminded of during this week is the importance of continuing to work with certain technologies if you really hope to engage them in your practice. Because, like, for example, probably in 2005, I attended a Dreamweaver workshop, and all I can tell you is that Dreamweaver is software that allows you to create websites. So if it's not part, it's like a language, you know, like learning French or Spanish or something if you don't end up practicing it. So.
Actually, I have worked with most of the technologies they have taught here before, but in completely different contexts. I had worked on that when I was writing for web portals and as a kind of feature writer for those, and somehow I had not thought of using them as part of composition classroom or for that matter using them as part of you know, literature teaching curriculum or something of that sort. So the manner in which Sydney and Scott kind of talked to us about it, explained the concept, and how everyone else approached the concept showed me the immense potential something like that had. So for me, what was really important is that, okay, I had the skills all along perhaps, but I did not know what I could make of it. And so so the difficulty for me was not so much as learning the technology or coming up with the finished product, but the difficulty really was in kind of changing my way of thinking about those technologies.
I think what I would say, the only thing that I found really hard about this process was the anxiety of putting something together in such a short period of time. But having said that, it was also extremely productive to have that deadline.
And being a perfectionist, I kept wanting to redo the video with the music, and I had to realize that once again I don't have that kind of time, so I have to be accepting of where it's at. So then once again I did think of my students as well, because I'm thinking some of them are going to do the same thing, and so when I go to assess that or grade that, I have to think along those lines. So I'm hoping I remember all this when I go to do that with my students.
I think that there were a couple things that were surprising about starting this project, and one of them was just sort of how much time this kind of project took. I think it took me maybe 3 hours to get the first 5 seconds of my video, and that is something I was not prepared for. So that was surprising, and it was also really hard to make those decisions, to choose when you had so many different modalities at your disposal, right? Actually starting to think about what's going to work best here, what's going to be realistic, considering my skills. So there was a lot to sort through, and that took a lot of time as well.
The getting the sound clips to not match the audio, the visual, the audio and the visual untied. I kept thinking about, I need a clip thinking about video that was together, where the sound matched the audio. And it was really hard to fight that impulse, or even the thinking about it, like, this could go there, and then I'm like, well, it won't make sense once you pull the audio off of it. So that was, I don't know if it was hard or challenging or easier than I thought it was going to be, but it was just really refreshing as far as how I was approaching the project and how I was approaching the way that the text, the physical, like the visual text went together with the sound and what the possibilities were there. I think it really opened.
I think I was also surprised by how long and how short 60 could be. So for me, I had like more than 60 seconds of audio, but I had less than 60 seconds of video, and in one form I was like 60 seconds isn't enough to fit all of this in, and then in the other form I was thinking like, how do I fill this other kind of 60 seconds? So I like split the 60 into audio and video. That was weird.
What came easy was knowing what I wanted to do. What came hard was the firm requirement that it could not exceed 60 seconds. And so condensing. And it was also hard for me to compose off the page. In fact, I ended up turning to my computer and composing a Word document that I essentially read into my audio recorder, and then it was too long. And so I had to, cut it.
To sort of, it seems like 60 seconds. I can come up with something to say in 60 seconds, but it took me a while to really come up with something that was going to be cohesive, but interesting to do in 60 seconds. So it was sort of the invention stage that was a lot more difficult for me than the actual sort of production of it. To have some kind of arc in 60 seconds, that was the toughest thing, to say, I know I want to go from this point to this point. I've got a pretty short amount of time to do it, but I want to do it in a way that is compelling and that takes an audience sort of through a narrative or through an argument in some sort of way. And that that was tough, to come up with an idea that I was going to be able to travel somewhere and have it not just be something that could be delivered in a sentence, but something that could be an interesting arc in a minute.
Yeah.
The most surprising part of the process was that I didn't think it would be hard for me. I'm a creative person, this will be fine. I'll just go in there and I'll come up with something cute and clever and let's do this. And yeah, it was much harder than I thought it would be.
I was surprised how hard it was for me to incorporate audio. I thought, coming from a poetry background, I thought, sound, I know sound, I can work with it. And then when faced with just these endless options online and not having any clue how to find material, I just kind of shut down. There was a moment where I was just like, I don't know if I can do this. I searched a bunch of websites and then just kind of got frustrated and went and found Truman and was like, help me know how to start. So in that way it was interesting. I can kind of relate to maybe what my students feel like when I assign them a research project and they don't know where to find sources. Really, with audio, I didn't know where to find sources or even what to do with the sources when I found them. You'd see a description of music, which is not like seeing a picture and saying, oh yes, that's what I want. You have to play these sounds over and over and over again to figure out what they are and if they match what's in your brain. And I found it impossible to find what was in my brain online.
I think I was surprised at first by how much my ideas were not coming together into a cohesive project. Because I said, okay, I have inventions, the idea, and I bet if I just stick a bunch of things in there and kind of depend on the juxtapositions or whatever other kinds of transitions between those images to come through, that'll make something really interesting. And I was like, no, this isn't. It's too, I was working both with black and white, 1950s archival footage from the Prelinger archive, and also with my own HD color footage from outside the building we're in at OSU. And I realized it was such a tonal shift. I had to either put some kind of filter or do something to the footage I took, or use less of it. And so it kind of was surprising to me, I think, all of the different layers that come into play when you're composing this style. I was very surprised by how difficult it felt to judge the pacing of my video. I feel like I've come to a place where I can really judge the pacing of my writing fairly accurately. And I think of this both in terms of creative and academic writing. But in terms of the video, I would sit there. Is this image on the screen for too long or too little? I really don't know. I can't decide. And maybe some of that is my composing time is compressed into a very short period of time and I had less time to stand back and look at it, but I still was surprised by how difficult it was for me to get a sense for how the video looked to an outsider. I just felt like I was in it. Kind of like, and that can happen with writing. You get in it and it's hard to look at the moving parts for what they are and realize what you have. And that's why.
I don't think, not about the composing process. I think about the revising. That was surprising to me in terms of just how at some point I was willing to just let stuff go. It's like, okay, that's 4 seconds I can use someplace else. And then having to sort of make up fill in that space with something not time consuming, but to make the connections clear.
I came up with a lot more material than I expected I would, I think. Yeah, so it was a little bit harder sorting through what would convey concisely and, in a well-crafted way, the points that I was looking at doing. So
and one of the things I noticed for my final project was we started out, and I did this with my 60 and 62, was starting out very big. And it's like, okay, that's too much. And then having to narrow down. But I do that when I write too. Like my initial dissertation topic was like a series of books. And it's like, okay, narrow.
In terms of the editing, I really had a difficult time deciding what to keep and what to take away, and how much to show and how much not to. So when I used the term editing, it's almost the same as in a print essay where you're drafting, because it's not where you have something and you're taking things out or putting things in that last final stage. One of the things I've been thinking about is editing is more like drafting in print, and so maybe we need a new term for editing. Maybe it shouldn't be called editing because that signifies something different to us. It was yes, the answer to that, yes, it was more difficult, but I would say even the invention was more difficult, because I can open a Word document and start typing, and maybe I don't know what I'm going to say, but I know that I can, start typing, get my thoughts out and figure something out. And really the revising and editing process on a computer, even though it can be extensive and detailed, I know the process, and it's something that's kind of second nature to me. So part of it was this is a new medium and I had no idea how to go about it. But then again, it was also, in writing, a lot of it's in your head. And so you can go to other sources and you can find things that they've said and integrate it, but your overall point is in your head that you want to make, or that I want to make. And in this, and I know how to make it with words. So while my point might have been in my head, one, I didn't know the point when I was starting out, but two, I didn't know what I would use to make the point, because it's so much more complicated than just words. I could use words in a video, I could use sound, images, still or moving, and so all of those layered things made it more challenging for me in the drafting process.